Washington Post congressional reporter Sean Sullivan joins us from Washington now. Sean, good to see you. So as you know, the president has blamed McConnell for the Republican legislative failures to date. Is that fair? And should McConnell be concerned by Steve Bannon's threats, war on the Republican establishment and on him specifically?
Yeah, I think he should absolutely be concerned. I mean, just look at what happened in the recent special election in Alabama, where Mitch McConnell and his allies spent a lot of time, energy, and money trying to get Senator Luther Strange, who was more of a traditional establishment-style Republican, across the finish line in that race. Well, that didn't happen. Steve Bannon's preferred candidate, Roy Moore, who has openly criticized McConnell, won that primary and is the front runner to take that Senate seat in December. So if that happens in other places across the map that Steve Bannon is already eyeing, this could be a real threat to Mitch McConnell. I think donors, I think strategists and others close to McConnell are really, really worried about a repeat of Alabama in other places, because if that happens, his grip on the job of majority leader in the long term could really be at risk. I
mean, Alabama is not usually seen as a bellwether, but going back to the first part of my question, Trump's relationship with McConnell, President Trump said earlier when asked about Steve Bannon's comments that he could, quote, understand where Bannon is coming from. How do these men repair a relationship going forward? Because don't they both need each other to move forward with any sort of legislative victory?
Yeah, they both do need each other. That's exactly right. And the only way to really repair this relationship, at least according to the Republicans that I've talked to, is to get tax reform done. That is their next big legislative undertaking. They failed when it came to repealing and replacing the Affordable Care Act, which is something that Republican leaders promised their voters for 7 years that they were going to do. And so now, you know, you look at party leaders and you look at their strategy, and what they're saying is we are all in on tax reform. We've got to get this done. We've got to show our voters that there's a reason for them to come out next year and reelect us, because, you know, they gave the Republicans the keys to the car. Republicans control the White House, the Senate, and the House. And so Republicans look at this and they say, okay, we've got to have some tangible thing that we can show voters next year. And they believe that thing will be tax reform. But you're right, they both need each other. And if they can't work together to get tax reform done, they both stand to suffer in the long term.
So they have to pass a budget first, and the Senate is expected to vote on the budget this week. Many consider Republican Senator Susan Collins as the key, from what I understand. It sounds like she is on board. Where does that stand? Because don't they need to pass the budget before they can pass tax reform down the line?
They do need to pass the budget. They do need to pass it soon, and they're hoping to do it this week. It looks like it will probably be passed, but we could be looking at another nail-biter right now. Senator Thad Cochran, who is a Republican, is away from the Senate this week. He's battling an illness. So now, instead of 52 Republican senators, you have 51. So you have really a very narrow margin of error right now if you are McConnell and if you're Trump. So you need to make sure people like John McCain, Rand Paul, others who have kind of, been difficult in big previous legislative pushes are on board. So we could be looking at another nail-biter here this week.
So there's such a skinny margin, and yes, there's so much on Congress's plate because of what Trump's done. His push, for example, to dismantle Obamacare, that has also thrown the ball back into Congress's court. The president, of course, is trying to use his executive power to end subsidies for insurance companies that are designed to keep premiums down. But Sean, the president said earlier that he did that to try and get Republicans and Democrats to work together on a short-term fix to Obamacare. So where do bipartisan efforts stand on a fix?
Well, right now it's really up to Lamar Alexander and Patty Murray, who are trying, or have been trying, to negotiate some sort of bipartisan compromise that would make these subsidies, that would extend these subsidies for a period of a few months or perhaps longer, in exchange for something that conservatives might want, like giving more power to the states, giving them more freedom to shape their own healthcare situation and laws. But here's the thing. It's not clear that enough Republicans in the Senate, let alone the House, are going to vote for such a compromise deal, because they've already had to go back home to their districts and their states and explain to their voters why they weren't able to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act like they said they would. And so now I think a lot of them are scratching their heads and saying, well, hold on, we couldn't repeal and replace. Now you're telling me I need to vote for something that props up the ACA? That's not what I signed up for. And so I think you're going to see a challenge for party leaders. Even if Lamar Alexander and Patty Murray can get a deal done, the real challenge is, can you get enough Republicans to vote for that?
You're hitting on something, Sean, that isn't just relevant in the health care. President Trump has also used his executive power to send the fate of DACA and the Iran deal to Congress. Does the president expect Congress will really act on these long-standing issues that have, frankly, not only divided Republicans and Democrats, but have divided the GOP itself?
Well, I think this is the way he looks at it. If Congress can do something and it's something that he can sign, it's something that his base will like, then, that's good for him. If they can't, then he has a scapegoat. Then he can blame Congress, and he can go to them and say, look, I made a decision, I took an executive action, and I gave it to the Congress, and they did nothing about it. And you're already seeing Trump kind of run against Congress. This is already sort of an emerging strategy that we might see more of in the midterm. So I think from his perspective, he's looking at it as, no matter what happens, I will have some sort of outcome that I can use to my benefit. I'll either blame them or I'll work with them, and we'll get something that we can both celebrate.
And that's interesting that you see him running against Congress. And of course, Congress, in both houses, ruled by Republicans right now. And doesn't the polling actually show that that strategy could work? Because the president doesn't seem to be getting the blame from the electorate on stagnation on these issues. Congress does.
Yeah, they really are getting the blame from the public. And even among strategists and donors, I was at a donor summit in New York that I was covering last week, where I asked a bunch of wealthy conservative donors, how much blame do you put on the president versus Congress? And I heard a lot more of the blame being on Congress's shoulders than on the president. So this argument is working at many different levels of the party. And that's another reason why McConnell really needs to watch out here, because he's becoming a really toxic figure in the minds of everyday Republican voters. And look, ever since Barack Obama left office, the conservative base has needed an enemy. They've needed somebody that they can fight against. And it looks like, for now at least, that person's not Donald Trump, but that person is Mitch McConnell, Paul Ryan, and Republicans in Congress writ large.
South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham seemed to say something that kind of reinforces your analysis on Face the Nation, that a lot is riding on Congress. Listen to what Senator Graham said.
We don't cut taxes and we don't eventually repeal and replace Obamacare, then we're going to lose across the board in the House in 2018. And all of my colleagues running in primaries in 2018 will probably get beat. It will be the end of Mitch McConnell as we know it.
So, Sean, who stands to lose the most potentially in the midterms? Is it establishment Republicans, or is it Republicans writ large as a party, and potentially the Democrats see an opening for taking back one side of Congress?
It's really any Republican incumbent that is on the ballot in 2018. So that's all of the Republican members in the House, and that's a handful of Republicans in the Senate who are facing re-election, because, what Graham said right there is a fear that privately a lot of Republican lawmakers and strategists have, which is that if you don't get anything done, you're practically begging for a primary challenger. And that primary challenger's argument becomes easy after a while, right? They can just go to the electorate and they can say, don't vote for Senator X, don't vote for Senator Y. Why? Well, because they did not get anything done. They couldn't fulfill a single promise that they made on the campaign trail, and it's time to clean house and go with someone new. And that argument could be a really, really potent one, and I think it's one that, every Republican who's on the ballot in 2018 has got to be really, really fearful of right now.
It seems like one that a lot of folks say helped President Trump win, of course. Sean, stay with me for a second so I can get your take on this next political story.